There comes a moment in life when God, in his quiet and merciful way, begins to lift the veil from our eyes. Not all at once, not harshly, but gently, because he knows how tender the heart can be when it comes to family. We want to believe the best. We want to hold on to the idea that love is automatic simply because blood connects us. But God is a God of truth, and truth must eventually come to light, even when it breaks our hearts before it heals them. You see, God does not reveal hearts through words, because words can be rehearsed. Words can be spiritual, polite, religious, even affectionate. But actions reveal what lies deep within a person. Jesus himself said that a tree is known by its fruit, not by its intentions, not by its promises, not by its titles, but by what it consistently produces. And when God wants to protect you from family members who do not truly love you, he allows their fruit to become undeniable. At first, you may explain it away. You say, they didn't mean it. You say, that's just how they are. You say family is imperfect. And God is patient while you wrestle with those thoughts. He gives you time because love hopes all things. But there comes a point when the same wounds repeat, the same patterns return, and the same pain resurfaces. And that is when God begins to whisper to your spirit, look again. Not at what they say, but at what they do. God allows moments where you are vulnerable, moments where you need support, moments where love should show up without being asked. And sometimes, painfully, it doesn't. Not because God has abandoned you, but because he is showing you something you could not see before. When family members minimize your pain, dismiss your calling, rejoice secretly when you struggle, or grow uncomfortable when God begins to elevate you, those are not accidents. Those are revelations. And this is where the Spirit of God works so deeply, because he does not expose to shame, he exposes to save. God knows how dangerous it is to keep opening your heart to people who continually mishandle it. He knows how harmful it is to keep expecting nourishment from a dry well, so he allows behavior to speak louder than excuses. He allows consistency to reveal character. Sometimes God will let a family member promise you support, only for their absence to become louder than their words. Sometimes he will let them speak blessings publicly, but withhold kindness privately. And each time it happens, something inside you begins to awaken. Not bitterness, discernment, not hatred, clarity. You begin to realize that love is not proven by titles like mother, brother, uncle, or cousin. Love is proven by sacrifice, empathy, truth, and presence. And this realization is not meant to harden you. It is meant to free you. Because when you finally see the truth, you stop begging people to be who they are not. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain peace. You stop carrying guilt for expecting basic love. God reveals true hearts so you can stop wounding yourself with false hope. There is a holy grief that comes with this awakening. It is the grief of letting go of who you thought someone was. And God does not rush you through that grief. He stands with you in it. He allows the tears. He allows the questions. But even in your sorrow, there is a strange sense of relief, because now your pain has a name, and confusion no longer rules your heart. God also reveals hearts by contrast. He lets you see how strangers treat you with more kindness than relatives. He lets you experience encouragement from people who owe you nothing. And suddenly you understand that love is not about proximity. It is about posture. It is not about shared history. It is about shared honor. And God uses these contrasts to gently detach you from unhealthy emotional bonds. This is where many people misunderstand God's work. They think exposure means rejection. But exposure is actually invitation, an invitation to step into truth. God is saying, I want to take you further, but you cannot carry illusions with you. He is saying, you cannot build your future while anchored to relationships that secretly resent your growth. And oh, how subtle this can be. Family members who don't love you may never say it outright. Instead, they question your decisions, mock your faith, minimize your victories, or bring up your past whenever God is moving you forward. And God lets it happen long enough for you to see the pattern clearly. Not once, not twice, but enough times that denial is no longer possible. When God reveals true hearts, he is not asking you to judge, he is asking you to discern. Discernment is not criticism, it is wisdom. It is the ability to see without hatred and to choose peace without guilt. And once you see clearly, God begins the gentle process of creating distance, not always physically, but emotionally and spiritually. You begin to guard your heart. You stop oversharing. You stop seeking approval. You stop explaining your calling to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And without realizing it, you are already walking away, not in rebellion, but in obedience. This is how God keeps you away, not with thunder, not with force, but with truth. He lets reality speak. He lets actions testify. And once the truth settles in your spirit, you no longer have to be pushed. You choose peace. And when that clarity finally comes, God leans close to your heart and reminds you of this one powerful truth. He did not reveal their hearts to break yours, but to save it. There are seasons when God does something that feels confusing at first, even painful, and yet it is one of the most loving things He will ever do for you. He creates distance, not because you have failed, not because you are unworthy of love, but because He sees what you cannot yet see, and He hears what your heart has been trying to ignore. God's separations are never acts of cruelty. They are acts of mercy wrapped in silence. We often think punishment comes with loss, but in God's economy, protection often does too. When God begins to keep you away from family members who don't love you, He does not always announce it. He doesn't always explain Himself. Instead, He simply removes you from certain environments or allows circumstances to shift so that access is limited. Phone calls slow down. Invitations stop coming. Conversations grow shorter. And if we are honest, the first thing we ask is, God, what did I do wrong? But God is not asking you to search your failures. He is asking you to recognize His covering. Because He knows that what has been draining you is not just what is being said, but what is being carried. The tension, the judgment, the quiet disapproval, the subtle manipulation, it all takes a toll on the soul. And God will not allow you to bleed internally just to keep a family connection intact. There are wounds that cannot heal while you remain in the place that keeps reopening them. And God, who is the great physician, knows when healing requires space. Distance is not abandonment, distance is treatment. When God separates you, He is saying, you cannot recover here. He is saying, your spirit needs room to breathe. Sometimes God protects you from arguments that never end well. Sometimes He protects you from conversations that always leave you doubting yourself. Sometimes He protects you from being the emotional peacemaker in a family that thrives on conflict. And though you may not see it immediately, the peace you feel once the distance is created is the evidence that God was at work. There is also something sacred that happens in separation. You begin to hear God's voice more clearly. When constant criticism quiets, when emotional pressure lifts, when expectations loosen their grip, the soul becomes still enough to listen. And in that stillness, God begins to restore what was slowly being worn down. Many people think strength comes from enduring anything. But endurance without wisdom is not holiness, it is harm. God does not call you to be endlessly available to what destroys you. Jesus Himself withdrew from crowds, from cities, from people who demanded without honoring. If the Son of God understood the necessity of withdrawal, how much more do we? God also knows that staying too close to unloving family members can distort your sense of identity. When their voices are loud, your confidence becomes quiet. When their opinions dominate, your discernment weakens. And so God steps in, not with rebuke, but with redirection. He quietly places you in spaces where your worth is not questioned, where your calling is not mocked, where your faith is not constantly on trial. You may notice that once the distance forms, your emotional reactions change. What once triggered anxiety now barely stirs you. What once hurt deeply now passes gently through you. This is not because you have become cold. It is because God has wrapped you in boundaries. Boundaries are not walls of bitterness, they are fences of wisdom. And let me say this tenderly. God does not need you to understand the separation immediately for it to be effective. He only needs your trust. Understanding often comes later, after the heart has healed enough to look back without pain. Only then do you realize how heavy the burden was that you were carrying and how much lighter your spirit feels now. There are also times when God creates distance because staying would require you to compromise who He is shaping you to become. Growth makes certain environments uncomfortable. As God matures you, elevates you, and deepens your walk with Him, not everyone will celebrate that transformation. Some family members prefer the version of you they could control, and God will not allow your calling to suffocate under familiarity. This is why separation often coincides with spiritual growth. Prayer deepens. Hunger for God increases. Peace becomes more consistent. These are not coincidences, they are confirmations. God is showing you that distance was not loss, it was gain. And no, God is not hardening your heart toward your family. He is softening it by removing you from repeated harm. Love can exist without proximity. Honor can remain without access. God is teaching you how to love without bleeding. When God protects you through distance, He also teaches you to stop chasing reconciliation that costs your wholeness. Some relationships can only be safe when they are observed from afar, and God, who values your soul, honors that safety. One day, you will look back and realize that the separation you resisted was the very thing that preserved your faith, your peace, and your purpose. You will see that God did not take something from you. He saved something within you. And in that understanding, your heart will finally rest in this truth: God's distance was not rejection, it was divine protection. There comes a sacred moment in the walk with God when He begins to touch something so deep within you that it feels unsettling at first. It is the place where your need for human affirmation has quietly lived for years, and when God begins to loosen your grip on family members who do not love you, it is often because He is inviting you into a deeper, stronger dependence on Him alone. This work is gentle, but it is also firm, because God knows that emotional dependency can quietly replace true faith if it is left unchecked. Many of us were taught, without ever being told, that family approval is a form of security. We learned to measure our worth by their acceptance, to feel safe when they agreed, and to feel anxious when they withdrew affection. Over time, this dependence becomes so normal that we do not recognize how much power it holds over our decisions, our emotions, and even our obedience to God. And so, in His love, God begins to remove the props. When God breaks emotional dependency, He does not do it abruptly. He allows situations where the support you expected does not arrive. He allows moments when your excitement is met with indifference. He allows you to step forward in faith only to realize that the cheering section you hoped for is silent. These moments sting, but they are not cruel. They are revelations. God is gently showing you where your heart has been leaning more on people than on Him. There is a deep spiritual danger in depending on others to validate what God has already spoken. When your confidence rises and falls based on family approval, your faith becomes fragile. God desires a faith that stands even when misunderstood, even when unsupported, even when alone. And so He invites you into a wilderness, not to abandon you, but to meet you there. The wilderness is where dependency is transformed. It is where God becomes enough. In the quiet absence of familiar voices, you begin to hear His voice more clearly. You learn to pray not out of desperation, but out of relationship. You begin to discover that God's presence does not compete with human affirmation. It surpasses it. This process can feel lonely, but it is never empty. God fills the space that people once occupied. He teaches you how to stand without leaning. He strengthens your inner life so that external rejection no longer defines your sense of worth. You begin to realize that the love of God does not fluctuate, does not withdraw, does not grow cold when you grow. God also knows that emotional dependency often keeps you tied to unhealthy dynamics. When you are dependent, you tolerate what you should not. You excuse what wounds you. You remain silent when God is calling you to speak or to step away. By breaking that dependency, God gives you the courage to choose obedience over approval. And there is a holy shift that occurs when this courage rises. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never change hearts. You stop shrinking your joy to avoid provoking discomfort. This is not pride, it is freedom. God is not stripping you of love. He is redefining it. He is teaching you that love does not require self-abandonment. He is showing you that your identity is rooted in Him, not in the roles you play within your family. Daughter, son, peacemaker, fixer, these labels may fall away, but who you are in God remains unshaken. As emotional dependency dissolves, spiritual strength takes its place. You become anchored. You become steady. The opinions of others lose their power to disturb your peace. You begin to obey God more freely because you are no longer calculating how your obedience will be received. And this is where true maturity begins. It is in this place that God entrusts you with greater clarity and greater calling. He can speak to you without competing with fear of rejection. He can lead you into new seasons without dragging old expectations behind you. And you realize that the separation from unloving family members was not meant to isolate you, but to fortify you. There is also a tenderness in this work. God does not harden your heart toward your family. He softens it while strengthening your spine. You can love without being controlled. You can honor without being emotionally entangled. You can forgive without returning to dependence. This balance is a gift of the Spirit. And one day, you will look back and see how necessary this breaking was. You will recognize that the pain you felt was the sound of chains loosening. You will understand that God was not taking something from you. He was giving you back to yourself, whole and free in Him. And in that quiet realization, your soul will settle into this truth. When God becomes your source, no one else has the power to empty you. There are times when God allows tension to rise not because He delights in conflict, but because He is redirecting your life. We often pray for peace and assume it will always look like harmony, but God knows that false peace can keep you trapped longer than honest disruption. When family members do not love you, God may permit misunderstanding, resistance, and even rejection to become the very force that moves you forward. At first, you try to fix it. You explain yourself more clearly. You soften your words. You adjust your behavior. You pray harder for unity. and yet the resistance remains. Conversations feel strained. Your presence becomes uncomfortable. And slowly, you begin to sense that staying requires you to silence parts of who God is shaping you to be. That is not coincidence, that is direction. God uses conflict to reveal when alignment has ended. There comes a point when two paths can no longer run side by side without one losing its direction. And God, who sees the end from the beginning, will not allow you to remain in a place that steadily pulls you away from your purpose. So he allows friction. He allows the discomfort to grow just enough that you can no longer ignore it. This kind of conflict is deeply painful because it comes from those who should understand you the most. But God knows that the hardest goodbyes are often the most necessary. When family members question your obedience, mock your faith, or resist the changes God is making in you, the tension you feel is not failure, it is transition. Sometimes God permits conflict so you will stop asking for permission to obey Him. When your calling begins to offend those who benefit from you staying the same, resistance is inevitable. And God, in His wisdom, allows that resistance to clarify your priorities. Will you choose peace at the cost of obedience, or obedience at the cost of approval? Conflict has a way of stripping away illusions. It forces truth to the surface. You begin to see that what you once called love was actually comfort, control, or familiarity. And as painful as that realization is, it is also liberating. Because once you see clearly, you can move honestly. God also uses conflict to loosen emotional ties that would otherwise hold you back. Without tension, you might stay too long, hoping things will change. Without resistance, you might delay obedience, convincing yourself that timing is not yet right. But conflict removes the illusion of comfort and makes forward movement possible. There is a moment when the heart finally understands what the spirit has known all along: this place is no longer home. And God does not force that realization. He allows it to rise naturally through experience. The arguments, the coldness, the misinterpretations all point to one truth: you are being called onward. This does not mean God wants you to fight. He does not call you to prove yourself or to win debates. Often, the conflict God allows cannot be resolved by explanation because it is not about misunderstanding, it is about divergence. Your path has changed, and not everyone is meant to walk it with you. And when you finally stop trying to make it work at the expense of your soul, something shifts. The conflict loses its power to control you. You no longer react the same way. You no longer feel the need to defend your every choice. You begin to move quietly, decisively, and with peace. God uses conflict as a compass. It points you away from places that no longer nurture your calling and towards spaces where growth is possible. And though it hurts to leave under strained circumstances, obedience often requires stepping forward without full understanding or full support. There is also grace in this redirection. God does not expose you to conflict to shame you. He allows it to free you. He is showing you that staying would require you to remain smaller than the destiny He has prepared. And He loves you too much to let that happen. One day, when you are standing firmly in the place God led you to, you will understand why the conflict had to happen. You will see that it was not meant to destroy you, but to release you. And the rejection that once cut so deeply will no longer define you. It will simply mark the moment you chose obedience. And in that clarity, you will finally know this truth. God did not allow the conflict to break you, but to move you forward into what He already prepared. When God removes certain people from your life, especially family, there is often a fear that rises quietly in the heart, the fear that something irreplaceable has been lost. We think, if they go, what will remain? And God, in His tender wisdom, allows that question to linger just long enough for us to discover the answer. What remains is Him, and what He brings is always more fitting than what was taken away. God never empties a space without intending to fill it. When He separates you from family members who do not love you, it is not to leave you isolated, but to make room for relationships that can actually nurture the life He is building within you. He understands that toxic connections drain the soul, distort discernment, and quietly erode joy. And so, in His love, He removes what harms so He can introduce what heals. At first, the absence feels loud. Familiar voices are gone. Familiar patterns are broken. There is a silence where noise once lived. But in that silence, God begins to do something extraordinary. He brings people into your life who speak without wounding, who listen without judging, who celebrate without envy. These are not accidental encounters. They are divine replacements. God's replacements do not always come immediately, because He wants you to recognize the difference when they arrive. He wants you to feel what it is like to be honored instead of tolerated, supported instead of scrutinized, loved instead of endured. When divine connections appear, there is a deep peace that accompanies them, not excitement rooted in dependency, but joy rooted in safety. These relationships often come in unexpected forms. A friend who understands your spirit, a mentor who speaks life into your calling, a community that prays with sincerity and stands with consistency. They may not share your bloodline, but they share your values, your hunger for God, and your desire for growth. And suddenly, you realize that family is not only something you are born into, it is something God builds around you. God replaces toxic connections with people who can walk with you, not against you. With people who do not feel threatened by your obedience or your growth. With people who do not require you to shrink in order to belong. These relationships do not demand constant explanation. They recognize the hand of God on your life and honor it. And this replacement is not meant to harden you toward those who hurt you. It is meant to heal the places where love was distorted. God is teaching you what healthy love looks like so you no longer mistake dysfunction for devotion. He is retraining your heart to recognize peace as a sign of alignment, not boredom. There is something deeply sacred about relationships God ordains. They do not rush you. They do not manipulate your emotions. They do not keep score. They grow naturally, gently, and with grace. And in their presence, you feel more like yourself, not less. You are not performing. You are not proving. You are simply being. God also uses these divine connections to restore your trust. When family relationships wound us, they often leave behind hesitation and guardedness. God understands this, and so He introduces people who are safe enough to help you believe again, not in perfection, but in goodness. Through them, He shows you that love does not always wound, and closeness does not always cost you your peace. As these relationships grow, you begin to notice something else changing. Your prayers sound different. Your confidence deepens. Your joy becomes steadier. This is because God has surrounded you with voices that align with His voice. When you stumble, they lift you. When you doubt, they remind you. When you grow, they rejoice. And here is the quiet miracle. In all of this, you stop grieving what was lost because you are too grateful for what was found. The ache softens. The questions fade. Not because the past did not matter, but because the present is filled with life. God never replaces merely to compensate. He replaces to elevate. The people He brings into your life after separation are often catalysts for the next season of your calling. They sharpen you. They encourage obedience. They pray you forward. And you realize that had you stayed entangled in what was toxic, you would not have had room for what was transformative. And even as God builds this new circle around you, He keeps your heart soft. You can bless those who are no longer close without reopening old wounds. You can remember without reliving. You can forgive without returning. This is the balance God creates: love without bondage, connection without compromise. One day, you will look around and recognize that you are no longer alone. You are surrounded, supported, strengthened, and in that moment, understanding will rise quietly in your spirit. God did not take family away to punish you. He removed what was harming you so He could give you what would carry you forward. And then you will know this truth with unshakable certainty. When God replaces, He does it better than before. There is a tender and often misunderstood work that God does in the heart when He keeps you away from family members who do not love you. And it is this: He teaches you how to forgive without reopening the door to harm. This is one of the deepest works of grace, because everything in the natural tells us that forgiveness must lead to reunion, explanation, or restoration. But God's wisdom goes deeper than sentiment, and His mercy is far wiser than human pressure. Forgiveness, as God teaches it, is not an invitation for someone to return to the same level of access they once had. It is a release, not a reconciliation contract. And when God separates you from family members who have wounded you, He is not contradicting forgiveness, He is protecting it. Because some relationships, if restored too quickly or too closely, would poison the very healing God is producing. God knows the heart. He knows how easily compassion can turn into self-betrayal. He knows how often forgiving people return to environments where they are hurt again, thinking endurance is holiness. And so He gently teaches you a new language of love, one that includes boundaries, discernment, and peace. There comes a moment when God invites you to forgive not for their comfort, but for your freedom. He does not ask you to deny the pain. He does not ask you to minimize what happened. He asks you to place it into His hands so it no longer controls your inner world. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is choosing not to carry the weight any longer. And this is where God's keeping power becomes so evident. He keeps you away so you can forgive without pressure, without manipulation, without the fear that forgiveness will be used against you. He removes the constant reminders, the subtle guilt, the emotional hooks, so healing can happen in quiet and safety. Forgiveness often begins in solitude. It begins in prayer, where tears fall freely and words fail. It begins when you finally stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen and surrender the need to be understood. God meets you there. He does not rush the process. He does not shame your pain. He walks you gently through it. And as forgiveness grows, something remarkable happens. The memory loses its sharpness. The anger softens. The need to explain fades. You are no longer driven by the past. This is not because what happened was small, but because God has made you strong. God also teaches you that love does not require proximity. You can forgive someone and still recognize that closeness would reopen wounds. You can release bitterness and still choose distance. This is not unforgiveness, it is wisdom. Jesus forgave, but he did not entrust himself to everyone, and God invites you into that same freedom. There is a holy distinction between reconciliation and restoration. Reconciliation requires repentance, humility, and change on both sides. Restoration requires trust rebuilt over time. God will not ask you to restore what has not been healed, and he will not demand access where safety has not been established. Many struggle here because they fear that distance means hardness of heart. But the opposite is often true. Distance allows your heart to remain soft without being continually bruised. God keeps you away so resentment does not replace love. He protects your spirit from becoming bitter while he heals it from becoming broken. As forgiveness settles into your soul, you begin to notice that the need for closure disappears. You no longer need apologies to move forward. You no longer need acknowledgement to find peace. God himself becomes your closure. His presence answers the questions people never will. And there is a quiet dignity that comes with this kind of healing. You stop defending your boundaries. You stop explaining your distance. You simply live free. Free to love God fully. Free to walk in peace. Free to bless without returning to bondage. God also knows that forgiveness without distance can sometimes enable harm. He loves you too much to allow your kindness to become a doorway for continued pain. So he teaches you how to forgive from afar, to pray without reconnecting, to love without reopening access. This is maturity. This is grace with strength. One day, you will realize that you no longer flinch when their name is mentioned. You no longer feel the heaviness when memories surface. You no longer feel pulled backward emotionally. That is when you will understand that forgiveness has completed its work. God did not keep you away to make you cold. He kept you away to keep you whole. And the freedom you now carry is proof that his way was right. And in that freedom, your heart will finally rest in this truth. Forgiveness set you free, and distance kept you safe.